Hi everyone. Well, yeah, right, I'm just gonna do this little video now because, I've decided that I'm gonna do this video, because of a few things I've heard, in the past week or so about, knowledge of disability, and particularly a, interview that was done on ITV in this morning, today. And, basically what they were doing was, there was this interview with this kid and his mother and this headmistress, I think, of this temporary, this establishment, that can help young children who have been excluded from school, at primary school age. As young, apparently they said some kids as young as 4, who've just barely even started school, have actually been excluded from, permanently expelled from schools due to bad behaviour. And they're talking about sort of the awareness that's needed around conditions like autism or ADHD, or anything sort of various conditions like ADHD or ADD or Asperger's syndrome, or the many conditions on the autistic spectrum, and how to actually support the children. I'm going to add a bit of personal experience into this video as well. I don't have ADHD. Some people may know that I do have Asperger's syndrome, and I do have slight learning difficulties, as well as I suffer from mild cerebral palsy. I will talk a bit more about this as the video goes on. I'm going to try not to make it too long. So basically, yes, they had this on this morning's interview. It was basically apparently about a documentary that they said I think is on Channel 4 next week, and this was a young lad. He's 9 years old, and basically he was kicked out of school due to bad behaviour. And they said, yeah, he had been diagnosed with ADHD, and that certain conditions ran in his family. Like I said, the father had ADHD, and he also had a brother who was on the autistic spectrum. And so they said they really couldn't know how to help him, and they didn't know how to help him control his behaviour. And so he got sent, so with some help, he got sent to this temporary facility which can specialise support, give specialist support with children with ADHD, to help them, I think, with certain medications and certain training, to help the children realise what's going to help tick them off and start them behaving destructively. And they said that by the end of his time, they taught him to walk away from things that might when he realises something that's going to make him angry or excited. They taught him, to recognise it and walk away, or to talk to someone when he feels sad, which is basically what anyone will get taught to do in a situation that they either don't feel comfortable with, something that's going to make you upset. Of course, when you have a medical condition, particularly being a young child, and you have a medical condition that does affect your brain, it can make it that much harder to recognise, because I think the symptoms with ADHD is that they're constantly thinking. Children are constantly distracted because of the way the brain functions. They constantly have thoughts. They constantly just constantly going around in their head. That's why they struggle to function like, this word is a word that I've got used to using, neurotypical people. And that's why, they basically always have thoughts, and they're always hyperactive, and even when they get tired, they struggle to sleep, because they still have these excessive excitement and thoughts going in their head. And basically with medication, the medication that for ADHD, which treats the condition, it helps them. I think it balances the chemicals in the brain, so that they can, so it can calm them down a bit. They still have the thoughts, they still have all the same symptoms, but it helps them to balance the symptoms a bit, to help them get relax and enjoyment, so that they can get to sleep. when they need to. So yeah, this is something I found really interesting, is that the fact that these kids, there's so many young children these days with a range of disabilities like the ones I've mentioned, and now getting and now getting expelled from school for these reasons. But they say, yeah, and something that's quite true, and this is something I've experienced from back in my school days, is that there still isn't really a huge amount of awareness, but there is a lot more awareness now of disabilities like autism or ADHD, that can, and there's special training providers. There are now specially trained staff in schools to support students with disabilities or neurological conditions or whatever the barrier may be. And yeah, but also due to government cuts. Now they say what the big problem is due to government cuts at this time, in this hard economic climate, that the government's cutting things just to save more and more money. So there isn't always enough staff and enough resources to deal, to help support all the children, and when there's a large group of children, particularly in places that specialise in supporting children with these disabilities, there's so many of the kids, but there's not enough staff, and a lot of the times, due to funding problems as well, the staff don't get as much training as they need to help deal with the students, because no person with ADHD or Asperger's or any form of neurological condition, no person is the same. They may have the same diagnosis, and they may have some similarities, but they're not the same person. And in some way or another, support has to be different at levels for different people. And it is easier. It is much easier in this day and age now to help notice the signs of kids before they've been diagnosed. And they tend to get diagnosed at a much younger age with these conditions, and that's why I think there's been slightly more success than there was back in my time in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, because of the level of awareness that there now is around specialist support. But it is a sad thing to think that that they're kicking children out of schools so young. I mean, the reasons being, if the child needs a lot of support because they're being very badly behaved, and that they could potentially be a risk to themselves or other people, which is why ultimately it's probably happening, because the staff just don't know what to do. They can often end up in the care or support of someone that isn't qualified, who isn't specially trained in the areas needed to support a child with ADHD. And and that, I think, is a big problem in this country, probably in other countries across the world as well. So now, obviously, as I've said, I don't suffer from ADHD, but I do have a short range of medical conditions. So I'm going to talk a bit about my personal experience and how I think things have changed. So what I've got to talk about is that I was born prematurely. I was starved of oxygen at birth due to my mum having to have a cesarean, because my mother suffered, at the time of my birth, my mother suffered from the pre-existing condition known as preeclampsia, which is a common condition for pregnant women to have, unfortunately, and we were both very ill. My mum was very ill, and yes, there were complications during my birth, which ultimately led to me being starved of oxygen, which caused mild brain damage. And so I was basically had to be put in the incubator straight away when I was born. I wasn't expected to survive my first 10 hours after birth, but luckily, after fighting for my life, I pulled through. And I was diagnosed with mild cerebral palsy, I think about the age of 1 or 2, when they noticed there was something uneven in my gait when I started to walk. So yes, I do still have memories of my childhood, particularly before I started school. I do remember just not really understanding very much. I was aware that I had some kind of physical problem, something called cerebral palsy, because that's what my parents taught me about. I tended just to think I was just a kid, a normal kid, because who doesn't when they're preschool age. Moving on to other things, like when I started nursery, I do still have memories of being at nursery. I didn't really well, at first I did talk to the other kids, but I do remember I did tend to misbehave a lot while I was there. I hated being left there by my mum. I do remember on several occasions after she left, I'd really play up saying I want to go home, and I'd sort of run away and go into the toilets, and a member of staff would have to come and find me, and I'd often get a telling off. Yeah, I do remember that. So yeah, but over time I did grow to get used to it, and I did grow to enjoy it and join in. Also, I remember for a time when I was just before I started school. This was coming up to the time just before I started school. Me and my mum went to sort of live in Germany for about just over 2 months with my dad when he was working there, because that's where my dad was living at the time. He was living in Germany, and we went to stay. And I was sent to childminders to be looked after, because my mum was studying as a mature student to become a teacher. And I was sent to this particular childminder. She was German, and she was looking after all these German children, which really wasn't a really big help to me, because I hadn't learned, I didn't really knew, I think I know how to say yes, I think I knew at the time how to say yes or no, which was nein and ja. They were the only 2 words I knew, and obviously I couldn't fit in. I couldn't fit in. This was unbeknown that I even had the Asperger's or any other problems at this point. I found myself often getting a lot of smack bottoms. Yeah, she did actually smack us. I've told my mum about it since, and she says she never told her. She says I never told her that this childminder ever actually physically smacked us. But I said, Mum, I'm sure I must have done. I know I did. She says, no. She said, if you told me that she smacked you, I never would have sent you there. I said, yes, Mum, I'm sure. I know I told you since, but that's long in the past now. But I do remember like feeling quite lonely or neglected by the kids. Plus, because here I am, I'm an English boy. I've got problems I don't even know about. I don't speak any English. I'm in a different country. At times I just sort of used to keep to myself. While I was there, family used to sort of entertain myself and not disturb other people, which is kind of how I got by at that point. Now we come to the point where I did start school, and I started primary school in year 4. I started primary school at the end of 1994. I started in reception class a bit late. I was only there for half of the reception year due to coming back from Germany late that year. And also, I needed to get some specialist support set up at school, because I went to a mainstream primary school. And straight away, I think the teacher noticed some problems. The teacher noticed a fair few problems I was having. Like I couldn't concentrate. I was constantly drifting off. I never took in a single word that had been said. And the teacher was constantly having to re-explain things to me. And she often found myself getting into trouble. So I was often getting told off all the time. I was literally getting told off at least once every day. My parents were frequently called in to ask what's going on, and he says he just doesn't pay attention. This is what teacher told. He's not paying attention. His head's always somewhere else, and saying that, I wasn't a particularly badly behaved kid, but I just wasn't. I was a daydreamer. yeah, I was definitely a daydreamer, and I often found it so hard to pay attention when I was a primary school kid, particularly in the infant stage, the beginning stage, and this brings me on to something that was said, something that really is something I feel is really, really horrible and shouldn't be said, is that when they call children, when they refer to children, before there was all this knowledge and all this understanding about these neurological conditions, how they used to just call children naughty children, and some of them still do. Some people are just so pig-headed these days, and they say, "Oh, these things don't exist. They're just naughty kids." Well, and this was a point that was made on this interview this morning, and said that they just call them naughty boys, and said no, they're not naughty kids. They have a problem. They have conditions, and they need help. And I know that, coming back to my story, my parents knew, other than my cerebral palsy, that there was obviously some other problems, some problems up here, and I was always separated from the other kids in certain lessons at school. I had to be given easier work to do because I just couldn't keep up. My brain wasn't allowing me to keep up with the standards of the other children, which became a huge confidence issue for me as school time went on. So my early school years really, I came out of primary school at the end of 7 years. Though some things had improved, there'd been a lot more understanding, but I had to be very closely monitored, and I had to have my own individual statement reviews with teachers, head teachers, and all this, and by the end of primary school, it was decided I should be put into a special school for Key Stage 3, and which I got a place at a special school, which was quite far away from home. It was an hour and a half taxi ride there and back every day for when I started school, and it was originally intended, I think, that I would stay there until I was 16, because it took hell to get me into the school. Reasons what we're going to talk about now is reasons potentially why this was a bad idea. First thing was that my mum openly knew that the school was facing financial troubles and could end up closing down in the next few years. I wasn't aware of this at the time. When I started at that school, I was started off because I was so low in confidence and I had so much catching up to do. I was placed in the special school, and I was in the easiest class in my first year, and I felt unaware of how behind I was to other kids. I actually got on so well that first year at the school. It was like a huge weight had been lifted, because I was always quite often doing so well in class. They often said I was the top pupil in the class, and the teachers were good. The environment was very calm. I was just getting on well with everyone, and I always felt things got so much better in the first year, at that school, compared to how things had been in my primary school years. I was getting on well with everyone. So that was that first year, so we can leave that there. And now when we get to the second year, I actually got moved up to the top form, and this is where things started going wrong in year 8 and 9. Year 8 particularly. When I started to get moved up to the top form, something I hadn't really learned about myself. I didn't really understood how I learned things. I didn't really understand how, because of how I was. I didn't really know that I learned things differently to other people, and it was a lot. And because the work was harder, it was a lot of reading and having to just sit and pay attention. And that, to me, was what I found different, which is at this point, at this school, this special school, things really started to go downhill at this point. Things going so well one year to just going shit the next year. And So yeah, basically just not having the right learning methods, because they knew. I knew that I was a bright kid. My family knew I was a very bright kid, and people who knew me in general knew I was a really bright kid. They knew I had gifts and potential, but I just as this year went on, particularly in subjects like maths, particularly maths and IT. IT actually was the worst subject I had ever done, having to learn about spreadsheets and rubbish like that. Oh, that was terrible for me. I could not take in a single thing that said, because they only had you looking at a projector. You weren't able to take any notes. Basically, you had to memorise stuff. For various reasons of my disabilities, I struggled to follow the column lines on spreadsheets, and that was just terrible for me. To the point where it got to year 9, I had pretty much every Wednesday off that year, saying I was sick. I was nearly off for every Wednesday in year 9, pretending I didn't want to do IT when I heard that we were going to do spreadsheets again that year. So yeah, for year 8, it was a pretty bad year. For year 9, the final year of history, I was placed in the top form again. Things looked up slightly better in year 9. I think the experience through year 8, the hard times, had helped me to realise some things, and I looked at how things I could do to try and improve the situation. Yeah, so many of the problems from year 8 sort of did occur in year 9, but it was a little bit more relaxing, just helping to get some of the things sorted, like just trying to find some ways to sort of pre-plan things to avoid, so it would be slightly easier to take things in. Saying that, for my cerebral palsy, my walking had gotten really bad, because I had my first operation at birth. No, actually no. I had my first operation when I was 4 years old, and for 10 years I'd been having sort of physio in schools, but it was time for me. They said the way we can make you much better is to have another operation. So during year 9 at school, I had a second big operation where I was in hospital for a week, and then was in a wheelchair for 6 to 8 weeks, and then basically once I was out of that, so I'd had a fair bit of time off school, but at the time for me that was like being almost in heaven, not having to go to school, because I really didn't like it that much, for reasons I've been talking about. But yeah, over time, sort of over the time, coming up to year 10, I had recovered from the operation. I was back on my feet. And given that things really weren't going well, I kind of decided, I know I've got to do something about this. I've got to make this change. So I asked my mum if it'd be possible for me, maybe, is it a good idea to think about returning to mainstream school? And surprisingly enough, my mum kind of said it might be an idea worth looking into and see what support's available. Because I do think she was worried about me being at the school for reasons. She knew I wasn't getting much help, and she knew also about the financial thing the school was going to. Potentially the school was going to be open for the remainder of that year maximum. And at first, when I spoke to my dad about this, he was like, no, 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 you are staying in there. You are not returning to mainstream school. It took guts and all. It took so much effort for us to get you a place in that school. And of course, I didn't go along with it. I actually fought. I had to literally fight my dad tooth and nail, even though I wasn't convincing. But yeah, we went ahead and looked into it. And by the end, we went for an interview at the local mainstream school here, and they said yes. Well, there is support available for students. We have an additional studies option as a lesson where you can get support with your coursework. So this would be great. And so yes, I did get accepted into the mainstream school, but I only started first on a part-time timetable there, doing 1 day a week, and I was still remaining at the special school for 4 days a week, which was just irritating to me because I just wanted to go to the mainstream school full-time. And it took a while. It just took a long time. It took till nearly Easter to get me to the mainstream school full-time, but it eventually happened. It had to happen for reasons anyway, partly because I was just so down in the dumps again, and the special school would be closed down by the end of the year, which did actually happen. So yeah, when I was in mainstream school, I actually when I returned to mainstream school for year 10 and 11, Key Stage 4, despite the fact of arriving quite late as a full-time pupil, I did manage to catch up with the coursework and all the stuff I'd done on the for the 5 essential GCSEs. I did enjoy it. Yeah, and I felt much more confident. The support in the additional studies lessons things was nothing like they provided at the special school, which was kind of surprising, but it was good. And yeah, I had a really big confidence boost. And despite the fact I still had some problems, just needing to have certain things explained in ways, but they got very understanding. And then by year 11, the final year, things were working out really well. I'd been able to structure things. I've been able to get help to structure things and, you know, get things sorted out in advance, like support with exams that I could have. And that decision was the best thing, because I ended up doing very well in my GCSEs. I got my GCSEs. I nearly did well enough to do my A levels, but just not quite. And I say I have no regrets about choosing to leave the special school and return to mainstream school, because I think it was the making of me, and I think the experiences I've had going through the ups and downs have given me a really good drive, and that's how I've kind of got to where I am today. I've had my ups and downs since my school years, but I'm really quite happy with where I am now. So yeah, so I went through a time when there really wasn't, in the early 90s, there wasn't really enough awareness about lots of things that need help. But I do think, yeah, I do think there needs to be more. I do think there needs to be more support for young children who are diagnosed. So I was diagnosed with the Asperger's syndrome at 12 years old finally, after being sent to this place for an assessment, which I had to go there for a number of weeks for 1 day a week for 3 weeks, and I finally got the diagnosis, and so that's pretty much that. But it's easy to diagnose, but I do think, you know, I'm glad for the amount of awareness that's now being spread, and you know, there's lots of media coverage on disabilities, which are good, and you know, I hope that for some future, I hope for, you know, young children or young people today, you know, won't have to go through some of the things some people in my day and age went through to get to make things better for them. But as I say, yeah, the experiences that I had have led me kind of want to just do this video to talk about it and talk about how things are in comparisons to some children today, or to, you know, some children to young adults who struggle, you know, who have been through some of the similar experiences that I have and are struggling with the same things I am. As I say, I'm very pleased with what I've come. I've had, you know, had different work experience. I'm now living pretty much independently, so I'm a free man, which is, you know, very good. You know, I've been able to get through things with support I've had, and you know, and things I've been able to figure out for myself. I've been able to do things, go out to play, you know, do things on my own now. I think that some people thought I might never be able to do, but I say that, you know, I do hope that for young kids, you know, I do hope for young kids that there's, you know, just as much awareness as possible to get them help, so as to prevent them from being kicked out of school at an early age, or, you know, being, you know, or being isolated, because it really won't help, and it really will set them back in life if that sort of thing continues to happen. So yeah, so that's really my experience. I'm just talking about my experience. I was kind of inspired by things I've been hearing, and things I've been hearing about the knowledge of disability. So yeah, so that's all for now. We can leave it there now, because it's nearly half an hour long, as usual. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll be back soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.